Well, everyone, welcome to the Martin Perry House. And this is our sort of first presentation, that program that we've had here for 3 years, something like that. So we welcome you all to our November presentation. And if you want to go online and see any of our past presentations, because even though we weren't having them here, we recorded a lot of presentations. They're all out online. You can go at our website and take a look at those, at your leisure. My name's Scott Whittick. I am the vice president of the board of directors of the Powell-Liberty Historical Society, which owns a house. And we're really happy to, see everybody here tonight after having to do so much, online and that kind of thing. I think we were passing around a sign-up sheet, so hopefully everybody got that signed. If not, please sign up. The other thing, if you're not a member, we do have membership cards, little green cards over there. If you're interested in signing up, we have different levels of membership for whatever your situation might be, or you can also go out online and become a member, and we would appreciate that if you're interested in that. As you know, we don't charge for any of these presentations, but we do appreciate any donations that you might want to make. It helps us maintain this beautiful big old house, which as you can imagine, it takes a lot to keep a house like this maintained. So without further ado, we're happy to have Mandy Henning here with us this evening. You all may know Mandy. She's the manager of the Powell branch of the Liberty Library. She is also an avid Civil War buff. And I was told, and she actually showed me, she has a Ulysses Grant tattoo.
I do.
And hopes to have a Lincoln one soon.
I might just do Grant again. I don't
know. So anyway, that's genuine passion. So in keeping with Veterans Day tonight, Mandy is going to share with us her passion for the Civil War, and with an emphasis on Powell veterans. So let's welcome Mandy.
Thanks for coming. I wanted to start with a little bit. One of my favorite Civil War historians' names is Gary Edelman, and when he does these really exciting videos, and there are lots of like action and lots of fun. And he always says, if you go to a battlefield, you don't have to just weep the whole time. Like, there were some great stories. Some people had stories that they told their entire life. So I want to have a little bit of fun and still recognize veterans. We are going to do a little more serious veteran tribute at the end for veterans of wars forward from the Civil War. But I hope that you learn a little bit about the Civil War, a little bit about Powell, and have at least a little bit of fun tonight. We don't have to be so serious. All right, so my name is Mandy Henning. I am a graduate of Ohio Wesleyan and then Kent for my master's. I was a team librarian for about 14 years, and I've managed the Powell branch for about 4 years. I believe it is totally normal stage of life, especially with women, to get obsessed with the Civil War around 40. My husband and I, during COVID, when we were on lockdown, watched like every documentary, and then have gone to a whole bunch of battlefield since. That's me at Shiloh, maybe the best day of my life. I was so excited. I didn't realize how many times you see Sherman's name at Shiloh. The first one I saw, I ran out of my car and bolted across this field. He's everywhere. Pace yourself. Okay, so we're going to do trivia throughout. The focus of this presentation today is mostly going to be the Halls, which is a family in Powell that sent all of their sons to the Civil War. So we'll talk about that specifically. We're going to do a little bit of battle by battle. So each one of those sons, we can talk about some of the major battles that they were in. And then we're going to do a little highlighting of the collection. This is some items from the Powell-Liberty Historical Society, and then also some items from my collection, and a very nice Lincoln from Alan's collection. So we'll do a little bit of that. And then I want to do a little bit of a tribute to later Powell veterans, so Powell veterans from Civil War and after, and then we'll do some questions. Let's get a quick, how many people are here because they're interested in Powell history tonight? Versus, well, I guess, any like really giant Civil War buffs in the room? I asked earlier. You don't raise your hand. This is my husband. He knows. He knows.
We've been to a lot.
Just kind of curious. So I would say I'm newish to Powell history. So at any point, if I have a fact wrong, you raise your hand and you say, no, Mandy, no. You tell me if I'm wrong. And I will happily take that because I am kind of new to the community. So Civil War stuff, I feel like I'm a little bit better, got a little bit better foothold. All right, so let's talk about the halls in Powell. Originally, Thomas and Eliza, whose maiden name was Humphrey, moved from Connecticut and New Hampshire, respectively. Hall bought 50 acres kind of right in the middle of what is now downtown Powell. It was like not a thing. Powell was not a thing back then. It was basically a cow path. Eventually, they would own 500 acres. He became a pretty big landowner in the area. They settled at the crossroads of Olentangy and Hall Street, hence the name Hall. In 1860, start of the Civil War, Thomas's property was valued at $2,500, which is $84,000 today, but that's just inflation rate. That's not real estate rate. If you had that land in Powell today, it was like millions of dollars, like not even close to that amount. He had 7 horses, he had 3 cows, he had 36 sheep, he had 10 swine. Talked about this. It is really, and I double checked this, listed as he only had 5 bushels of wheat that year. Like that's such a small amount of wheat. It's like this much. He did have a lot more corn. You can see all the stuff this was listed on the 1860 history of the town. So Thomas Russell Hall was his name. He was born in 1798 in Lebanon, New Hampshire. He married Eliza Humphrey, who was born in Connecticut. He was the father of the family. Most men who were 60-ish would not have enlisted in the Civil War, but there's a guy. The oldest, does anyone want to guess the oldest person to enlist in the Civil War? How old he was? I gave you a clue because it's got to be over 60. What'd you say?
I said 80.
You're correct. He was exactly 80, in fact.
No.
He was 80.
Oh, wow.
He 2 other regiments rejected him before the one that accepted him because they were like, no, you're too old to be in the Civil War. So his name, I'm going to do a couple links here, and I'm sure that we'll have these listed later in the video. This is Ancestral Findings. The name of this veteran was Curtis King, and they have a great video about him. Eventually, in Iowa, they formed a group called the Graybeards that were all men over 40 who wanted to enlist in the Civil War. And they actually saw a little bit of real combat, like not much. They tried to keep them not, running around. But at some point, they defended a garrison and shots were fired. So he ended up dying about a year later after the Civil War was over. But yeah, oldest known. In the Confederacy, they drafted really young guys and really old guys by the end. But as far as I know, that is the oldest guy who enlisted, Curtis King. He was in the Union. So later, if you're interested in more information, Ancestral Findings, if you Google Curtis King, he will show up on there. Pretty interesting story. I hadn't heard of him before I did this research. So okay, but in our case, Thomas Hall did not enlist because he ended up actually passing away in March of 1862. So the Civil War had pretty much just started at that point. So 1860 census, he is listed as a brickmaker and a farmer. He was secretary of the Temperance Society here in Powell from 1835 on. A member of the Methodist Episcopal Church, and actually one of his sons would become a reverend of the Episcopal Church too, so we'll talk about him. That is the Methodist Church in 1902. It moved from Liberty to where it is currently. You guys know the one over on Olentangy that they're renovating currently. So that is a very, very old building in Powell. I'm glad they're finally fixing it up. That's good. Okay, so in addition to all that, in addition to the brickmaking, this is a busy man. In addition to the brickmaking and the Temperance Society and the church and the farming, he also owned Powell's first mercantile store called Hall's Corner. Prior to the first post office opening in Powell in 1857, mail would come from Lewis Center. It would go to Hall's Corner, and then people would come pick up their mail from that location. Once Powell became an actual town, we got a post office. But until then, it was Hall's Corner, which was also a place where you could go just get general goods and stuff. So that is Hall's Corner. I got schooled on this because I thought the oldest building in Powell was the Oddfellows building on the corner where Kraft House is now. No, I got schooled. This is the oldest, well, at least in downtown, this is the first mercantile. It is where Oishi, the Japanese bistro, is now where Jenny's used to be. So, and I asked, is that the original building? And they said, yeah, it is. So first real store in Powell was that. And there's a couple pictures of it from a couple different eras. Trivia. Okay, I was going to make you guys hardtack, but it turns out hardtack takes 4 hours to make, and nobody wants hardtack anyway. You can't eat it. What is generally considered to be the first shot of the Civil War? And bonus, if you know the date, I'll give you an extra props. Does anybody know?
John Brown.
So John Brown, acceptable answer. I can think of 4 things that really were the start of the Civil War. I would accept John Brown. That's a good answer. The Harper's Ferry, the raid on Harper's Ferry with John Brown is a very good answer. I was thinking the first military shot, though. But Robert E. Lee was there that day. So.
Was it in Alexandria, Virginia? They went to go check the flag down.
Who said Sumter?
Sumter, yeah.
Sumter is generally understood. There's also that thing in the House of Representatives where the guy caned the other guy. As soon as Lincoln was elected, essentially everything went kind of crazy. Sumter was what I was thinking. That was once the Confederates, everybody seceded. That was Fort Sumter was the only national fort on the coast that was still in national hands. And they said, okay, you have to evacuate until 3 a.m. And if you don't, we're going to fire on it. And then Pierre Gustave Touton Beauregard, the best name in the Civil War, fired. And then that became the start of the Civil War. Anybody want to guess how many casualties at Fort Sumter? I always think this is interesting.
I think there's one.
And it's a Confederate horse. No casualties at Fort Sumter. They did destroy it, but one Confederate horse was killed, and that's it. Anybody want to guess the date? This is harder. I had to look it up if it makes anybody feel better. April 12th, 1861, 4:30 a.m. There are stories of all the citizens like just praying, like, don't hear any gunshot, don't hear any gunshot. And then 3 passed, and they thought, okay, we're good. And then 4 hit, and it was on. So, yeah. Good job. See, you guys know Civil War stuff. All right, so this is the start of talking about the sons of Thomas Hall. So these are not in order by their birth date. I honestly mixed it up a little because a lot of them served in the same couple of units, and I didn't want it to be boring, so I just did a mix. So these are not in chronological order. First one I'm going to talk about, though, is Russell Case Hall. He was born January 24th, 1825. He died in 1889. He was, a lot of these guys, before they were married or before they went to the war, had other types of jobs. So in his case, he was a teacher at 17. He later operated a drug book and stationery store in Lewis Center. He became a Powell correspondent for the Daily Gazette, which I have to assume means if anything happened in Powell, he told the Gazette about it. He was enlisted as an orderly sergeant or first sergeant in the 145th Ohio Volunteer Infantry, and then he re-enlisted into the 88th, which a lot of his brothers had been. A lot of the Hall boys, as we go through, are going to be in either the 145th or the 88th. OVI stands for Ohio Volunteer Infantry. First sergeant is the first guy under the commissioned officers. So he's the guy underneath that gets the orders from those guys and tells the men about it. Okay, let's talk about the 145th. I'm so excited to tell the story. This is such a good story. So the 88th, not very exciting. When you hear the other brothers were in the 88th, basically it was organized in 1862. Camp Chase is in Columbus near or West Broad is now. So they were basically, after Morgan's raid, they were kind of protecting the Ohio River. So these guys are either inside the state or right outside. They were at Camp Chase so they were down in Cincinnati after Morgan's raid until 63, and then they were mustered out in 65 in Ohio. They did not lose anybody in combat. They lost 80 men to disease. So the 88th did not see a whole lot of action. Neither did the 145th, except for one day. And it was a big day. They were, honestly, when I started this presentation, I was a little worried that all these guys were going to have really boring service, or they would just were kind of at home. No, there's a couple crazy ones, and this is one of them. The 145th was organized at Camp Chase as well. They mustered in 64, and they left the state for Washington, D.C. on May 12th. So this is kind of the end of the war. They were assigned to garrison duty around the Potomac, basically defense of Washington. They repulsed Early's attack on Washington July 11th and 12th, and they mustered out in 64. So let's talk about Early's attack on Washington. He said later, we didn't take Washington, but we did scare Abe Lincoln like hell. And I don't believe that's true. We'll talk about Lincoln here for a second. They lost 10 men to disease, and I don't think they lost anybody to combat. So that's a picture of Camp Chase during the Civil War. Obviously, that is way built up now. That's not what that currently looks like. So Early's raid on Washington. This is a year and a week after Gettysburg. Confederates are on the run. Grant is lieutenant general. He is in the middle of the siege of Petersburg right now. So he's stuck down south, but this is a letter from Lincoln to Grant that I can read it if I can get closer. I have seen your dispatch expressing your unwillingness to break your hold where you are. Neither am I willing. Hold on with a bulldog grip and chew and choke as much as possible, A. Lincoln. And the thing I love about this, and this is the signature, if I get one tattooed, it's going to be this one. He's so excited about this dispatch. He does this ... and that he never does in his name. He's like, oh, like stay on there. So they became very good friends by the end of the war, and I love that letter. So Grant has taken all but 4,000 of the men that are defending Washington down for the siege of Petersburg. He's got Lee on the run. And at some point, Jubal Early, do I have a picture of Jubal Early? I think I do. Jubal Early. At some point, Jubal Early meets with Lee, and Lee says, look, we got to get Grant off our trail. We can't, like, we're running out of supplies. Grant is holding on like he does. Go up and harass Washington and see if he gets scared enough that he sends some of those men back up north. So Jubal Early, on like July 64, goes up north, looks at the defenses of Washington and sees like guys that had been in the hospital, new uniforms. He sees nice, new, crisp uniforms, which means they're not veterans. A lot of them have never seen combat before. And he said there were places in the wall in Washington where you could just walk through. I mean, it was not well defended at all. If he had struck that day, the first day he was in Washington, he honestly might have taken some of Washington. They were not well defended at all at this point. Unfortunately, his men had, this was the hottest, driest summer anyone could remember, and they had marched 250 miles from Lynchburg in 3 weeks to get to D.C. They were exhausted. They were hot. They couldn't, he was like running up and down the lines being like, we got to attack now. And the guys didn't have it in them. They didn't have it in them to do this attack. So he's like, all right, we're going to sleep tonight. We're going to attack in the morning. They, in the meantime, Lincoln has heard that there are Confederates surrounding the city. So he and Mary Todd go out to look at it. Lincoln gets real excited that there's actually a battle in Washington. Like, he's up on the parapets. He's like running around. He's looking back and forth. At some point, the guy next to him takes a bullet to the leg and has to be carried off. I mean, Lincoln all of a sudden is pretty fearless. Imagine the Confederate point of view. It looks like Lincoln. He's in the hat. Like, betting man, he's 6'4". The average man in the Civil War was 5'8". It's Lincoln. So they start to put. They start to like try to shoot Lincoln. At some point, Oliver Wendell Holmes, who's a poet, wrote this beautiful poem, my favorite Civil War poem, that says, anybody who's seen the Ken Burns, this is familiar, but he wrote this beautiful poem. We have shared the incommunicable experience of war. We have felt, we still feel the passion of life to its top. In our youths, our hearts were touched with fire. Like, what a beautiful poem, right? This day, not knowing it was Lincoln, he said, get down, you damn fool, before you get shot, which is a lot less poetic. But Lincoln wouldn't get down. They finally said, okay, we're gonna like tackle you if you don't. And he giggled at the thought of them having to tackle the president. And they finally got him down, but every time something exciting would happen, he would pop up again. So Lincoln has the distinguished, I guess with pride he can say, he was the only acting president that has been shot at in a combat situation. It was Lincoln. That was it. So they rest overnight. There's all these great pictures of him being very tall with all these guns going off. The next day, Jubal Early wakes up and he gets his spyglass and he looks out to see if the ramparts around DC are still pretty empty. And he sees it swarming with troops in blue uniforms. And they are not bright blue, new, crisp uniforms. They are worn uniforms. And he knows that Grant's veterans have arrived. And he says, I think not. So that was as close as the Confederates ever got to taking DC. And they were outnumbered initially, but once Grant's guys got up there, that was kind of the end. So anyway, this infantry that you think didn't see much action. If you look at the 145th, you think, oh, okay, they were just around DC, no big deal, but they were there for the attack at Fort Stevens and saw Lincoln getting shot at. So everybody from that war had a story. So, all right, so that is Russell Case Hall. Those were his two big campaigns that he went on. Next brother is Edwin James Hall. He was born January 24th, 1825, and he died in 1897. He learned the cooper's trade, which is how to make barrels, and made barrels for local breweries around central Ohio. He also manufactured shingles by steam power. I don't know exactly what that means, but he had a sawmill and he also made brooms. A couple of the brothers were in this same trade. He is listed in the Thomas Holcomb, I'm going to guess, of Connecticut history as a worthy and esteemed citizen and a substantial farmer who also held the office of Justice of the Peace. So he did a couple things pre-war and a couple things post-war. According to this Liberty Township history is really interesting. It was written in 1888, looking at Maryland. 1880, thank you. So a lot of these guys were still alive. They're written about in the first person, which I thought was super interesting. So they said Mr. Hall is what may be termed a natural mechanic. He has often solicited to work in machine shops. He was with 6 of his brothers in the late war, 2 of whom molder in southern soil, which we will get to. This I thought was sad and also had kind of a good outcome. He had but one child, James, who when a babe manifested a precocity rarely seen. At the age of 2.5, he could play accordion and played violin when 3 years of age. Mr. Hall and all of his brothers are adherents to Republican sentiment. Their father was an old line Whig, which is a lot of those guys in the war. Grant was that too. He lost 3 children in infancy, the last of which was not named. One of the babies lived to be like 8 months old, one lived to be like 4 months old, and then the last one only lived 4 or 5 days. So at this point, I got very nervous doing the history, like, oh, I hope the son, James, who survived, I hope he outlived both parents, and he did. I looked it up. He lived into the 1900s.
And this, if I might interject, that was his great-great-grandfather.
James was?
No, well, actually, Edwin.
Oh.
Is his great-grandfather.
Wow. Huh.
Yes.
The relief to see you. I was so worried when I was reading that. So there were a couple, you could pick your price point in the Civil War, like how long you wanted to serve. A lot of those guys signed up for a 100 days war. They thought the war would be over in 100 days. Grant thought it would be over in 100 days. So you could also sign up for a 3-year commitment, and then you could sign up to do the rest of the war. So in this case, a lot of the brothers signed up for the 100-day service. Rank at the end of the war for him is listed as corporal. He may be the brother that was promoted the most times. That's part, if you guys were going to do your family history, I would look at that because it's hard to tell sometimes. I will tell you the National Park Service, I was telling Alan earlier, the Soldier Sailor database does not have the ranks correct on most of those guys. They list Grant leaving the war as like a corporal, and he was lieutenant general, so, you know. But that would be an interesting place for you guys if you wanted to research it to start. So he was also in the 145th, so he was there the day that Lincoln got shot at. And he also served garrison duty at Arlington Heights. I looked it up to see if that is Arlington National Cemetery. It is not. It's in Virginia. So, okay, trivia. What is generally considered to be the last battle of the Civil War? Bonus, no, the actual one. Anybody want to guess? This is kind of a trick question. I gotta. Looks at husband.
Wasn't Appomattox?
Appomattox is what everybody generally considers to be the last battle of the war. It was a really small, I had to look this up. Who said?
Texas.
Ooh, Texas is correct. So I thought it was Sherman chasing down Johnston. It's not. That was a month before Appomattox. Sailor's Creek was the big battle before Appomattox Courthouse. I didn't actually think there was a battle of Appomattox. There is. It was like a day or two later. So after that battle, Lee's like, we can't. Well, actually, Grant writes to Lee and says, like, if you want to keep dueling this out, cool, but the blood is off my hands. If you keep fighting, it's on you. It's not on me. And Lee goes, nah, I disagree with you, but let's meet. And then that became Appomattox Courthouse. In those days, it took a long time for people to get news, though. In Texas, they had not heard of these occurrences. So, Battle of Palmetto Ranch, May 13th, 1865, is the last. If you don't count like guerrilla fighting, which I don't, Texas is the last battle of the Civil War, and it was a month after Appomattox. But if you ask the actual your average person, they're going to say Appomattox Courthouse. So. All right, next brother, George Hall. He was born October 29th, 1829. He died 1893. He was a school teacher as well before the war. He served 5 terms as the Justice of the Peace after the war here in Powell. He was a teacher before he got married. He was a druggist after. Known as a gentleman of probity and excellent influence. He was in the 145th 100-day service as well, so he was there for the Battle of Fort Stevens. This is from the Liberty Township history. In 1864, he enlisted in Company K, 145th Ohio State Guards, and was out in the 100-day service. Has served as Justice of the Peace for several years and is now serving his 5th term. I had to ask one of the other historians here what this next part meant. Mr. Hall was Justice of the Peace before he entered the service. Several of the officers presented themselves before him to be sworn in by the esquire, which he did to their satisfaction. And while he knew it was not a valid swear, yet they were satisfied and went on their way rejoicing. So they basically said, hey, can you swear us in? And he was like, yeah, sure, but it's not real. So that was in the history, though. I thought that was pretty fun. This family had one daughter, the Halls, named Mary Hall. Unfortunately, she died at about a year old. They had all sons. Other than that, she is buried in the Powell Cemetery. Infant mortality rate in 1850 was almost 50%. Like it was just so high. In the South, when the war came about, it went even higher. At points, it kind of dipped, but then you would have, some germ would come through. So at this point in Powell, though, it was like 50%. So they were pretty lucky to have that many sons survive, really, considering the mortality rate. So I was so excited when I found out there was a girl in the family because I thought, I can talk about women in the Civil War. And then she unfortunately passed away. But I still want to talk about women in the Civil War because I think it's very interesting. And I have a little video. There's a couple ways you could legally be a lady in the Civil War. You could be obviously nurses. That was very important. A branch of nursing which was not well known in the Civil War but did exist. These are called vivandiers. A vivandier is a woman that, see the little canteen? She would actually go on to the battlefield and try to triage wounds. Like, I don't want to say during the battle, but whenever she safely could get out there, and she would carry fluids for the soldiers. At the start of the Civil War, triaging any kind of injury from battlefield was like not established. There was no established way to do a flag of truce to recover your wounded. There was no great way at the beginning to bury your dead either. So it was bad. There were some really bad stories from that first couple of years. But once they got a little more organized, you had things like vivandiers. You had corps that would go out and try to recuperate the wounded. This is also a vivandier, but this is a zouave. Does anybody know what a zouave is? Oh, they're wild. One of my friends who does reenactment said that this is always, when you're reenacting, this is always the party. These are the partiers, the zouaves. There were zouaves in the North and the South. I don't know where they originated. Somebody please email me later if you find this information out. But they basically had sabers and dressed totally different. They had these wild red pants, and they were kind of the wild men of the Civil War in some ways. And there were some women vivandiers, but they looked like that. They didn't look like your buttoned up Northern vivandier. And then finally, and you hear more stories about this than actually existed, there were women that dressed as men to be in the Civil War. It's a small amount. Some went because they didn't want their husbands to leave. They were like, no, I'll go with you. So eventually, a lot of them got caught. If they got wounded, a lot of them got caught that way and would be shipped home, essentially. Some never did, though. Some did the whole war. So I have a short video about, this is from the American Battlefield Trust. If you are interested in the Civil War, I would recommend the American Battlefield Trust. Their videos are wonderful. And they had a little short video about women in the Civil War. So I want to show that really quick if I can. Good stuff. Any questions so far before I go forward? Yes.
I noticed that two of the brothers were 35 and the other one was 31. Isn't that kind of old? So
The average, I'm trying to think. The average age soldier, I think, was 22 or 23. Average height was 5'8". Average weight was like 150, 140, something like that. So yeah, 35 is a little old. Grant was 39 when the war broke out and didn't have the rank that he had by the end. So yeah, oldish. In the South, that would have been kind of dead in the middle because they drafted more people. But yeah, 35's not, most of those guys were in their early 20s. So yeah, good question. Any other questions? Yeah.
His middle name is Case. Is that from Case Street or? Case Hall.
I don't know. That's a great question. Afterwards, I have all my photocopies from the files and stuff upstairs. Let's look through those, and because I was going to get those for those guys anyway. Great question. Those two names come up in Powell Civil War history and normal history over and over and over again, so it's possible. Well, let's look after this though. Asa Gordon Hall, kind of a big deal in Powell history. He was born in 1830. He died in 1890. He was also a cooper and a music teacher. He was 35 when the war broke out, so yeah, he is a little bit older. He was living in Ashley, actually, at the time. When his dad died in 1862, he inherited the farm and he bought his brother's shares. So they also inherited parts of the farm and he bought the rest of them. When the railroad came through Powell, he served as a railroad agent. He went into real estate. He actually plotted the town. And when the railroad came through, he donated part of his land for the tracks to be laid on. He was also in the 88th and only served 100 days. He did 100 days service. Asa Gordon Hall is all over Ohio, or all over Powell history, though, because he plotted the town. That's kind of a big deal. Okay, trivia. Name any 5 battles of the Civil War. Bonus, name any 1 Confederate victory. There are not that many. There's some.
Bull Run.
Bull Run is a Confederate victory as well. The first one, or both.
Got Gettysburg.
First
Antietam.
Manassas, second Manassas.
Yeah, Gettysburg. And so interesting thing, the South always named their battlefield by the river that was nearby, and the North usually named it by like the town nearby. So hence Bull Run / Manassas. So okay, you said Antietam, Gettysburg, Vicksburg. Oh, I had a shirt on earlier that said Vicksburg. Vicksburg, great one. Chancellorsville is also a Confederate victory. If I had an hour. Oh, the Shenandoah campaign with my favorite little tiny baby Phil Sheridan. He's so little. Fredericksburg.
But yeah, Wilderness.
Wilderness 1 and 2.
Harper's Ferry.
Harper's Ferry counts, I think. Well, there was a battle of Harper's Ferry too. So even after the John Brown thing. Chickamauga's a good one. Chattanooga's a great one. Shiloh's probably my if you were like, all right, you have to spend 5 years on a battle, it would probably be Shiloh. But which one? Spotsylvania that's a bad one. Cold Harbor's a bad one. All those overland campaigns, it's like, if they're like, you want to go back in time, I'd be like, nah, not for those. I'm good. Confederate victories, the big one's Chancellorsville. That's really like Lee's big moment. That's also when Stonewall loses his arm at Chancellorsville. Manassas / Bull Run, that's a Confederate victory. Antietam is really kind of a draw, but technically a Union victory. Next brother, Levi Hall. This guy really interests me. There's some stuff here. He was born in 1833. He, like myself, is a Wesleyan graduate, and he entered the ministry for the Methodist Episcopal in 1854. Moved to Minneapolis in 1872 and eventually became a medical doctor in the 1880s. Here's the thing. You remember that earlier 1880 history that I referenced where it said that all of the brothers were in the war and 2 died? I cannot find a record of this guy serving. I have his draft record. Upstairs, he's not in the soldier-sailor database. Upstairs, there wasn't a mention of any regiment. I suspect he was, but you can tell here, this was on Ancestry. So you can see he was at that point in Union County. Hall, Levi, there's his date. He was listed as a farmer, listed as married. So he is registered for the draft. I found him again registered for the draft. So Hall, Levi right here. At the time the Civil War broke out, he was like doing, you guys know that the Neil Diamond song, The Traveling Salvation Show? He was doing that. he was doing like tent revival stuff. And you can see during the war, he moved like 3 or 4 times in the space of that war. I wonder if he was proselytizing and entered for the draft, but never, or did 100 days service. It's not mentioned in his obituary. I'll show you his obituary here in a minute. So Hall's, I would love to know. If you guys find his history of his service, you let me know because I couldn't find it. And that doesn't mean anything because I didn't have like weeks to work on just his part of it. But what I did find is a picture. You need to get pictures. So there he is. It's him in Minneapolis. That's his wife, who looks very like a preacher's Victorian wife to me. She's got that look going. Here's the crazy. This is his obituary. It says, Dr. Levi Hall, 81 years old, resident of Minneapolis for 40 years, minister and physician, died Sunday at his home. And they got the funeral information. He was partially paralyzed 2 years ago as the result of being run down by a bicycle. What? No, I'm thinking ding ding bicycle too, not ver bicycle. Like that. This is the ding ding era. Also, would love more information on that if you guys ever do a deep dive. But there, if you look actually for you guys, if you look on Find a Grave, they have a couple really good pictures of him. You never get pictures, so I was thrilled to find it, but could not find history of him serving. And if you read the entire obituary, it does not mention service in the Civil War. So if anybody finds it, I don't know. Okay, so this is the first of the brothers that passed in the war. John Hall was born October 26, 1833. He was in Regiment 26C. He and his other brother, who passed away, both were in the 26th Ohio Volunteer. They are numerical, as you might have guessed. So the fact that the other brothers were in like the 154th and the 88th, the 26th was organized much, much earlier in the war. He died November 29th at the Battle of Spring Hill, which is in the Nashville campaign. He is listed in the Powell burial records as being buried in Powell. If you look at the date, 11/29, that is the date of the Battle of Spring Hill. There is no way that his body could have been recovered in one day. So there's a marker. He is not there. He is buried in Nashville. I wanted to show this in long form because I think this is incredible. Those are the battles he was in. Where I've highlighted is where he died. He was at Shiloh. Veterans of Shiloh, I could talk about Shiloh for an hour. The short version, the Union was surprised. They didn't know that attack was coming. They thought it was going to come in Corinth, which was a railroad hub back then. Still is, actually. If you we went to Corinth, there's still a railroad hub. So they'd been skirmishing for a couple days. Shiloh, they were out like looking around. William Tecumseh Sherman was absolutely convinced a battle was not coming. And he's out at the tree line, and the guy next to him, his orderly, gets shot and killed beside him. And he said, "My God, we are attacked," and ran back. Grant was 9 miles away at this place called Cherry Mansion in what's the town that Cherry Mansion's in? I just forgot the name. Savannah, Tennessee. So kind of a surprise. The guys that were in Shiloh said if anybody ever tells you they were more scared than they were day one of Shiloh, they are lying. Shiloh was crazy. So he was in that battle. He was in Corinth. He was in Perryville. He was in Chickamauga, Chattanooga, Battle of Atlanta and the Siege of Atlanta with Sherman. He was at Kennesaw Mountain where his brother passed away. He did the Nashville campaign and then finally died at really like the very, very end of the war. I mean, this is like 5 months before the war ends, so he almost made it. He really rightfully could say he saw the entire war until the very end. I mean, he was in everything. So organized at Camp Chase, and then all those battles, he had a ton. And his brother dies of wounds received at battle. He died in the battle, which is pretty rare. If you look at the casualties in the Civil War, it's killed, wounded, missing, like gone home. The Southerners, after a while, were like, "I'm out of here. I'll see you guys later." Like a lot of those guys deserted. A lot of Northerners deserted. So when you see those casualty lists, it doesn't mean everyone killed in battle. It means everybody that died after the fact. It means everybody that just left. In his case, he died in that battle. I work with a lot of younger people at my library, and there's this thing they do on social media where they say, just a Luke appreciation post, and they'll post nice things about, their friends. So this is just a Grant appreciation post. I'm obviously a huge fan. I think that as the years have gone on, it used to be everybody was so in love with Lee, and Grant was the drunk butcher who was a terrible president and who was corrupt. As the years have gone on, those scales have tipped quite a bit, and I think rightfully so. He was born in Ohio. If you guys ever get a chance to go down to the birthplace or his school home, it's real fun. I was a little too excited to be there, but they tolerated me, which was nice of them. He was very progressive. His dad was not only an abolitionist, but when he was younger, he roomed with John Brown and John Brown's dad's house, so they knew each other. So Grant, at some point, Lincoln says, "Tell me the truth. Do you think African Americans would make good soldiers?" And that's his response. He was like, "Yeah, absolutely, they would, and it's going to weaken the South. So let's go."
He was born in Ohio, but he was raised in Galena, Illinois.
No. He was born in Ohio, raised in Ohio. He left at 15 to go to West Point. And then after West Point, he was in Jefferson Barrack, which was in Missouri. He met his wife, Julia Dent Grant, in Missouri. Her family had a plantation, including slaves, outside of St. Louis called Whitehaven. So he, at some point, he was up in that northern area. Galena is as far north and west as you can get in Illinois before you hit like Wisconsin. It's way up there.
Right.
So at some point he moved to Galena, and then his dad had a tannery shop there. He was working in his dad's shop right before the war broke out. The lowest point of his life in some ways, because he and his dad did not get along. He hated the tannery business. He actually, I think now would have been a vegetarian or something. Like for all these gory battles, he couldn't stand the sight of blood in his food, or he would send it back. He was very, very good horseman, and really hated his dad's tannery business from an early age. The smell of it like really bothered him. So no, the house is still there in Galena. They gave it to him after the war. He said his only aspiration after the war was to get a sidewalk from his house to downtown in Galena. That was all he wanted, but the country needed him for a couple more years. So anyway, I have a link there that I might show it. Can I show it? It's pretty good. Has everybody seen the History Channel miniseries about Grant? Oh, did anybody see the Teddy Roosevelt one? Oh, it's so fun. I'm on a Teddy kick currently. This is the trailer for that. A little bit of a trigger warning. It definitely shows combat, so just be aware. It's not super, super bad, but you definitely see a little. Trivia. Name any 5 generals of the Civil War, North or South. Bonus, and this is a little tougher. Name an admiral. Admirals are tougher. Well, I gave you one. Grant's one. You can have one. Farragut. Porter. Oh, and the River Queen. Oh, Porter. Bernie. Yeah. The Burnside is named after Burnside. He has great ones. Dan Sickles and his one leg. Meade. Yep. Sheridan. Oh, little Phil. Phil and I are the same height. He's tiny. There's this line Lincoln says, "Oh, I thought you had to be at least 5'7" to be a cavalryman."
Pickett won Civil War, was he?
Who was?
Pickett.
Oh yeah, Pickett's charge. Yeah, he was.
Yeah.
Yep. He had never led a charge before Gettysburg, day 2. Really?
Went to Camp Pickett for summer camp.
What year?
Oh, God. Back in the
Probably
50s,
70,
60s.
71.
We're probably there together.
Is it named after Pickett?
Huh?
My
Camp Pickett, I
condolences
think
to
it
you.
was. I'm not real sure.
Farragut, that could be a whole day. All the naval guys are so interested. Did you guys know that the Confederates invented the submarine? Look up the Henley. Oof. Crazy. All right, you guys are good, man. You had admirals down. I love it. All right, next brother, Thomas Stephen Hall. He was born 1842 and he died 1894. He also served, obviously. According to the Scioto Company Descendants, which is one of the things that's in the file upstairs if you do the Hall file, about 1870, he became the superintendent of the gas, steam, and water works at the Girls Industrial School, which is now like raised. It used to be Scioto Juvenile Correctional Facility, which I went to actually as a librarian. They also list him as a gardener, suggesting that he might have been responsible for the grounds and maintenance of the institution as well. He got heat stroke in the Civil War. He was a private in Company C of the 86th. And he did his 100-day service basically in West Virginia. He later switched to the 145th so he could serve with his brothers. We're going to talk about sole survivorship here in a minute too, because now it would not be allowed to serve with as many brothers in one unit, I don't think. Before and after the war, he was a railroad agent. And then he also made shingles and broom handles with Edwin. He was in on that business as well. So the 86th organized at Camp Chase in 62. They moved to West Virginia and guarded some railroad depots, including Clarksburg. And he was in C, so Company A, C, H, and I were on duty in Parkersburg, July 27th to August 21st. And they basically did garrison duty, constructed some fortifications, and then they were ordered back to Camp Delaware and mustered out September 25th. So he did the 100-day service as well. Now, this is the second brother who passed in the war. Also the best middle name I've ever heard, Barzilla. Come on! I was so bummed when I figured out he was the other one that passed. I was, oh, not Barzilla. That's such a cool name. He died July 31st at Nashville, wounds received at Battle of Kennesaw Mountain on June 18th. He is buried in Nashville, but also has a grave marker in Powell. He died 3 months before his brother did in the exact same unit, which I can't imagine for the family. So here's a strange thing, Halls. This is another thing for your research list. Battle of Kennesaw Mountain was June 27th. He died on June 18th. So he wasn't at Kennesaw, but I learned that, so this is William T. Sherman and Joseph E. Johnston. They were forming up on June 19th. This is only a guess. I suspect there were always sharpshooters before battles that would just kind of, if you put your head up, you were going to get nailed. I suspect he was killed by sharpshooters while they were forming for that battle. I do not have proof of that. I don't know why he died. I mean, he died of, it wasn't disease. He was killed. He's listed as battle wounded. If you guys ever find out that, let me know too, because I'm so curious why he died like a week before the battle started. So, just a quick. This is Marshall Clayson. I know you can't read this, and that's okay. Clayson, though, he was also killed at the Battle of Kennesaw Mountain. He was married and an Ohio Wesleyan student. And there's a whole story, and it's not for the faint of stomach, but there's a whole story about his body being recovered and brought back. He was buried, same thing, June, July, and was brought back by rail car to Delaware to be buried. He is actually buried at Oak Grove Cemetery in Delaware. Thank you. I'm from Marysville, so I always mix up the one that's in Marysville. But yeah, he's actually buried at Oak Grove, but it was like a month-long, really awful process to get him back up here. Without the embalming happened late in the war, but he was killed and buried on the field. So the two brothers that died in the war both are just buried down south. It was you had to be very wealthy, or you had to be very lucky, or in this case, his wife begged his friends to go get him and bring him back. So sad story. If you ever get a chance to look up the March, I'm going to do a podcast for the library on this guy at some point. I think he's pretty interesting. So this just shows for Theodore what the battles basically that were taking place. This is Sherman and Johnston just clashed all the way down, and Kennesaw is one of these battles. And then this is up and through the Carolinas. Once Sherman conquered Atlanta, he begged Grant to let him go through South Carolina because he thought South Carolina was personally responsible for the war because they were the first to secede. He was begging him, and finally Grant said, okay, go do it. And he was, for anybody that's complaining in Atlanta, like, no, Grant, Sherman was much worse in the Carolinas than he was in Atlanta. So yeah, that's for the purposes of Theodore, that last battle at the bottom, that's Kennesaw. All right, just a Sherman and Johnston appreciation post. Sherman gets a really bad rap for the war, and maybe some of it's deserved. He was also born in Ohio. He was born in Lancaster. His dad passed away when he was 9, and he went to live with a pretty wealthy family in Lancaster called the Ewings. He married his stepsister, which sounds grosser than it is, really. Like they were not blood relatives at all, but they had grown up together. Their letters back and forth during the war, not very romantic. He's always like, "Slap money." Like if you ever look at those comp letters, aren't that nice. In some ways, Joseph E. Johnston. So there's two Johnstons. There's Albert Sidney Johnston, who died at Shiloh, no relation, and there's Joseph E. Johnston. The things people think about Lee, I think, are actually true in some ways of Johnston. He was your consummate Southern gentleman. He never owned, his family did own slaves, but he didn't. He knew Grant and Lee and all those guys prior to the war. He went to West Point. He was in the Engineers Corps after for the Mexican War. There is a funny quote. Winfield Scott said during the Mexican War, "Johnston is a great soldier, but he has the unfortunate knack of getting himself shot in nearly every engagement." Like, he was so brave, he would just run on. So the Johnston and Sherman were basically pitted against each other for most of the end of the war, but really liked each other. And Sherman was very fond of him. They were all friends after the war. Grant and Sherman and Johnston were all friends, and that isn't true of all those Confederates. Finally, Sherman passes away. Sherman's that's a whole day conversation. If anybody ever wants to talk to me about Sherman for like 10 hours, let me know. But Sherman passes away. Johnston's pretty old at this point, and he's a pallbearer. and it's in New York, it's freezing, and he takes his hat off, and everybody's like, no, you put your hat on, like you're gonna get your death of cold. And he said, if this were the other way around and Sherman was my pallbearer, he would keep his hat off, and he did, and he died 10 days later of pneumonia. Like he was pallbearer, and then they kind of went together in a weird way. But yeah, very interesting, these two. There's a great story too of when Lincoln.
Pallbearers at Grant's funeral.
They were pallbearers at Grant's funeral as well. Thank you. When Lincoln was assassinated, Sherman had already been in negotiations with Johnston to surrender his army. And he goes down and they meet in this house, and Sherman's like, pulls out the dispatch because the newspapers aren't coming to the South at this point. And he said, I just want to let you know that Lincoln has been assassinated. And Johnston started to cry. And he said, I'm so sorry for you to have lost your leader. And I am so sorry for us because he was our best chance at reconciliation. So yeah. Oh, Sherman all day. I was way too excited when we went to the Sherman house. I made Marching Through Georgia cookies that had little flames that went on his exact path through Georgia. First time they ever saw that, I think. Okay, so I have a quick video. That's all the brothers. I thought a really good video of the end of the war. This is again American Battlefield Trust, and just kind of talks about 1865. I mean, what an insane year for the United States. We lose Lincoln, the war's over. I mean, it's just a wild year. So this is just a little video on that real quick. See if I can get it to load. Really quick, I did want to do one. We'll do some questions, and then I've got a couple things from the collection, but I just had a quick slideshow of Powell veterans from other wars. So I thought in honor of Veterans Day, we'll do a quick slideshow, and that's got some names. If anybody's related to anybody, please shout it out. And then after that, we'll do some quick questions, and I can kind of talk about the collection a little bit. Here we go. Was just, I obviously focused a lot on the Civil War. That was just a couple of veterans from other wars. Any questions? This picture, super fun. You could do a name those guys. There are a whole bunch of famous guys in this picture. This is the Grand Review at the end of the war. Grant looking down the street. I love that. Kump is there. Sherman and Grant are only in 2 pictures together that I know of. The other one is post-war. I think that's Rosecrans. Is that Rosie? Or is it? Oh, it's Meade. Anyway, there's a bunch of guys. Johnson is in that one. There's a bunch of guys in that. Any questions?
Grant went to West Point.
Mm-hmm.
Did Willie went to West Point?
Yep, he did.
They same time?
No. Lee's quite a bit older. Lee got 0 demerits. He's like known for getting 0 demerits. Also, son of Light Horse Harry from the Revolutionary War, which I didn't know. Grant got a couple demerits. William Tecumseh Sherman almost got kicked out. No, he wasn't close. I wouldn't say it was close, but yeah, Lee went down in history for being known for. They were both in the Mexican War together as well. At Appomattox, Grant said, "Oh, I remember I met you in the Mexican War," and Lee was like, I'm sure in a very southern way, said, "I'm sorry, I don't recall," because he was so much younger. Grant was a junior officer at that point. He wouldn't have remembered him. Any other questions? That was a good one. That was a great one. Well, so I can show you a little bit from the collection here. Some of this is just my stuff, and then some of this is the house's collection. And you're welcome to come up and look at these here in a second if you have any other questions. This is the New York Times from Monday, May 30th, 1864. This is a real one.
What year?
1864. This is from my collection. It's Grant's March, a new base. They're getting very close to City Point. This is close to the end of the war. So the article is really interesting. This is also one giant piece of paper if you unfurl the whole thing. But Alan Linda brought in this beautiful picture of, this is I think an etching of Lincoln. But it's a really good one. I was saying Lincoln is so, you've seen so many pictures of Lincoln, it's interesting to see kind of which one is which. I have a couple of these. If you go to national parks, especially in the national battlefields, you can get these little cases that are recovered rounds from battles, and then it tells you which one. So I've got Appomattox, Vicksburg. This one, I should pass this around. Have you guys ever held a Minute ball? They were so heavy. That's why there were so many amputations in that war, because it wasn't going to go well if you got hit. They're huge. This was Lookout Mountain, which is one of my favorite battles, and there's a sidearm in here. Somebody pulled out a revolver. They got so desperate. So this is from my collection. And this is a tintype that my husband and I bought. I'm dying to know if there's anything written on the back. This is an actual Civil War soldier, a Union soldier, but I've heard if you take these apart, the photograph can just disintegrate sometimes. So in the case, it stays. But this is mine. From the Martin Perry house, though, this is a roster written by, I'm trying to remember the name of the guy who wrote it. This was a roster from one of the units that originated in Powell, and it's alphabetical, and it basically just says which company those guys were in. So this is a Civil War roster from the era. The Martin Perry house also has a really beautiful tintype of a mother and a baby that probably would have been sent to a soldier. This is era as well. And also, and this is my favorite Victorian type of artifact, hair. We don't know where the hair came from. Hair does not, it never decomposes. So Victorians were so into sending hair to everyone. It was like a whole thing. They would make sculptures out of hair. The Victorian mourning hair is really a thing. Nope. So those are just a couple items from the collection. I bought these. These are prints of JCar soldiers that when I bought them, they said were Oddfellows. I don't know if that's true or not because there's nothing on the back. But my favorite is, I didn't even notice this when I bought it, but the happiest of the three, the guy that looks the nicest, is missing his hand from the war. I didn't notice it till after. He looks so thrilled to be alive and so thrilled to be back home that you can't feel too bad for him. He looks pretty happy to be here.
Same setting.
Yeah, same setting. That's what makes me think it could be something like an Oddfellow, but I don't have any proof of that.
You know, they mentioned in a movie or one of the films you showed about 620,000 were killed in the Civil War, and they say, I just finished Tim Scott's out of South Carolina's book, Redemption, and they talked about that was the most anybody's ever been killed in any war that the United States.
So the difference between the Civil War and the other wars is we were on both sides, so it doubled the casualties essentially. Yeah. I've heard that the Southern male casualties were as high as 25% of the population that they lost, like really a huge. There was a generation that was lost in that war essentially. So. Yeah. Any other questions?
Wanted to show you a picture.
Oh, it's Edwin James Hall. Oh, this is awesome. Ooh, I'm gonna.
And I think he's got medals on the front, but it's hard to tell.
Yeah.
It's so old.
One of the things that I ran out of time for was talking about the JCar. I would be really interested if he was in the JCar because those JCar medals were definitely a thing. A lot of them, well, no, I won't say a lot, but some were actually even made out of old Confederate cannons and stuff. That's awesome. Oh, I love it.
Yeah, the one that was
The one that
One of the
lost.
brothers.
Oh, but one of the
that's pretty neat.
children. That's awesome. All right. Well, thank you guys so much for coming. Thank you very much.